All right, now I have my palette all clean. I just put some fresh paint on there. The color I'm going to be mixing is blue purple. This is a tertiary color. I know it's difficult to see on here, but you can see I've got my warm blue here. I've got my cool red there. I'm going to be mixing up a lot of this color so that I can save it between days, so that way over the course of several days I will be able to use the same color and not have to worry about remixing to work on my painting. And I also have some black and white here because we're going to be mixing up some of our tints and our shades. So I'm pretty much set up to paint here. I've got my palette knife, I've got my paper towel, I've got some extra over here on the side, I've got my palette paper taped down to the desk, and this is with that shiny side up. You want to make sure the shiny side is up or the paint's going to kind of stick to it. I've got my jars of water, my brushes, and I've got my two handy things that I need. I've got my black and white Vektor image so that I can see where my tints and shades are going to go. And then I have my drawn out Vektor, which is going to get painted. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mix up that color. So that's what I'm going to focus on first. And I'm just going to kind of take pretty much all of my blue off of the palette, put it in the center because I'm going to be having most of my color there. But I'm going to mix this on my palette paper here. So since this is a blue violet or a blue purple, I'm not going to use as much red. So you can see in terms of parts, I've got mostly blue on there and then just this little tiny bit of the cool red that I'm going to mix in to make my blue violet. And I'm going to mix these two together and see what it looks like. Okay, so I start off by kind of pushing the colors together on the palette paper. I'll kind of scoop it up, push it back down. You don't want to kind of stir it like this. You're going to end up with like little streaks of color that are not fully mixed. So as you are painting, you're going to get sometimes some solid blue, sometimes you'll get a little bit of the cooler red in there. And you want to make sure that this is fully mixed before you start using it on your project. So I think I've just about got it. I am going to do a small little test on my paper to see exactly what this looks like. I know on the recording it's going to look super, super dark. Sometimes I suggest adding just a touch of white into your color, but because we're also going to be using this for our shades and mixing a little bit of black with it, I'm not going to add white at this point, just because I want to make sure that that color is nice and pure. And I'm pretty sure I've got my blue violet here. As I look on my palette paper, I can kind of see it. You can also take your palette knife and sort of scrape it on the paper, and you can see that that is really more of a bluish purple, which is what I'm looking for. Okay, so now I'm going to take most of this, I'm going to put it back in the center of my palette, kind of away from that blue. I've got a little bit of blue there just in case. And I can probably return some of that red. I did cross-contaminate, so I'm not going to put that back into the container, but maybe I'll save it for something else a little bit later. So you can see I'm picking up my paint right off the palette paper and putting it directly onto my palette. So now I've got my color mixed up. I am going to mix up several different versions of a tint, because this way I will have those, I can kind of move in between them. So I'm going to make my tints in varying degrees, starting from white and having my lightest one here, and then moving into my darkest. So I might use a little bit of the paint that's left on my palette paper just to try to do that. So I'm just going to wipe off my palette knife here. You want to make sure that there's not a lot of color on there when you're pulling from. You can see I already got some black on myself, and that's okay, it washes off. So I'm going to take quite a bit of white here, because I want this to be the second lightest thing that I'm working with. Obviously, lightest is going to be white. I only want to have the tiniest bit of my color. There's a very tiny bit on there. And I'm going to mix that into this white, and we're going to see what it looks like. And it's probably not going to change too much. You can see because it's less paint, I'm kind of picking it up, putting it back down, smushing it down, mixing it together. Remember, we're not stirring. These are not spoons. You want to use whatever flat part you can to kind of pick up and push it back down and mix those colors together. And I still have some streaks, which is why I'm still kind of working it up. I'm a little close to this, so I keep picking up just the tiniest bit of that blue purple. But I think I've got it. And I know on the screen it doesn't look very different, but if I hold it up here, yeah, it still doesn't look very different. It's just very, very light, and that's what I want. I want it to just be a little bit darker than my white here. So I'm going to take about 3/4 of that, and I'm going to put it right next to my white. And this way I know that that's my lightest color. I did leave some on the palette because I'm going to mix up the next value. So I'm going to wipe this off a little bit with my paper towel. I need a new piece soon. And then I'm going to take just a little bit more white. But now I'm going to add more of that blue. Okay, because I want it to get a little bit more intense. I still want it to be light, but I want it darker than this one. And again, I'm kind of jumping a little bit in terms of values. We could sit here and work like we did on our value scales and create a lot of little in-between values. But we can kind of fudge some of those as we are painting. So we want to get about probably 4 really good values in our tints that lead up to our main color. And this looks a little too similar to that, so I'm actually going to take a little bit more of the blue purple that I mixed on here and add it to that. I want it to be a bit darker. I want it to be a darker tint. And just remember, if you have gone too far in one direction or another, take about half of what you have here. So if this was a little too dark for me and I needed to add a little bit more white, I would take about half, put it in a separate part, and then add the white to that. Otherwise, you're going to mix forever trying to get just the right value. And in this case, I may have gone a little bit darker, but I'm going to keep it. And again, I'm going to take about 3/4 of this color, put it on my palette there. You can see there's a definite difference in there. And this time I'm only going to take the tiniest bit of white and now I'm going to add quite a bit of blue. So I want to make sure I get most of this white paint off of my palette knife, so I'm not contaminating my original blue violet, blue purple. And so now I'm going to take a pretty hefty helping of that blue violet. And now we're going to mix it up and see what we get. I think I still want that to be darker, so I'm going to add what little bit I have left on here. I may add a little bit from my palette. I think I want to, just to make it a little bit darker in that tint. And again, you saw me wipe off my palette knife, so I'm not cross-contaminating. And again, you really want to make sure you mix these up so that you don't have any streaks in them. And I think that's good. I'm going to take most of this color. I'm starting to get some streaks in there, so I'm going to try and make sure I get that out. All right, so I've got my color mixed here. It's definitely darker than the one that I made. So I'm going to take most of this, put it on my palette. And now I'm going to use what's left to try and make a really, really dark tint. So I'm going to use quite a bit of my original color here, and I'm just going to kind of mix it with what's left on my palette paper, because again, I want this to be close to how dark my original color is, but just a tiny bit lighter, so that when I'm trying to blend my colors together, it's a little bit easier because I've kind of got these in-between values already pre-mixed, and then I don't have to worry about it. And this is looking pretty good. I know on the screen it just looks super, super dark. The hazards of technology and using cameras and things. And I can tell, you can maybe tell a little bit when I turn the palette knife, that it's definitely way darker than this one, but it's lighter than what's happening there. So that's what I want to have. That's what I'm going to put for my last value for my tints. And now, because the color is so dark, right, I'm going to use that for some of my shading areas, but I'm going to mix up to at least 2 of my dark shades. So I'm going to only do about 2 of them. I don't need a lot. And I'm going to start here and then work my darkest one back to here. So I am going to take a pretty decent chunk, and I'm going to a different area of my palette paper, because again, I don't want to sort of cross-contaminate with the white. It'll start to look kind of gray. And then I'm just going to take just a little bit of black. Black is pretty strong, so you don't need a lot. Okay, you can kind of see on my palette knife there's not a ton there. It's a pretty decent scoop, but way less than what I've got mixed here. And same thing, I just want to make sure that I'm mixing the paint together so that I can not have streaks of color when I'm trying to blend. You may not notice it now, but you'll definitely notice it on your painting as you get going. So I'm going to take about, maybe just a little bit more than half, not quite 3/4. I'm going to put that in this spot. I'm going to put my darkest one right next to black, so that way I know that it's definitely my darkest value before I actually get to black. And again, I'm going to wipe my palette knife off. Before I do that, I'm going to take probably about the same amount of black, maybe a tiny bit more, and mix it with what's left. And what you should have is a color that, yes, has quite a bit of black in it, but still reflects some of whatever color you're mixing. In my case, it is blue-violet. It's a little bit black, so I am going to grab just the tiniest bit more of my color, mix that in there, and then this is going to go into my last spot, and I am ready to start the vector painting. I'm going to hang on to this mixing sheet because I'm going to use that to kind of mix some of the in-between colors that I don't have here if I need to, or if I just need to mix up a little bit more of a color, I can definitely do that. All right, so at this point we are ready to paint, and that'll be part of the next video.